He hated God. He hated the church. He was one of the most powerful men in French Freemasonry, at the head of his lodge, with the power to open or close the most important doors in the country. Then, on a freezing morning in 1983, he walked into a crypt in Lourdes just to get warm, and he never walked out the same man again. What happened to him in those few minutes cost him his career, brought him death threats, and redefined for him the word miracle. Over the next few minutes, we'll reconstruct this story fact by fact exactly as it happened. Maurice Caillet was born in 1933 into a Breton family, atheist and openly anti-clerical. He was never baptized, never received any religious education, and grew up convinced that science was the only valid answer to life and death. He became a brilliant gynecological surgeon and urologist in Rennes, one of the first in France to perform sterilizations and family planning procedures years before the law regulated them. At 35, after the collapse of his first marriage, he began looking for answers outside of medicine. He turned to radiesthesia, joined the Rosicrucian order AMORC, and took an interest in occultism and what he himself would call white magic. It was during this period of searching that he entered Freemasonry. He was initiated into the Grand Orient of France. Over 15 years, he rose quickly through the ranks, eventually becoming Venerable Master, the head of his own lodge. He experienced firsthand what he himself would later call the invisible network. Favors traded between brothers, doors opening in health commissions, in ministries, in politics. A system of belonging worth more than any individual merit. After 15 years as a surgeon, backed by his lodge brothers, he rose to head the French Social Security's Health Examination Center, a position that opened the doors of Paris to him, from ministerial commissions to direct contacts within the top ranks of the state administration. By this point in his life, everything seemed to have a rational explanation as far as Caillet was concerned. Man, science, the network of power. God, quite simply, was unnecessary. But in 1983, that life built on absolute control began to crack. His wife, Claude, fell seriously ill, and the medicine Caillet had believed in his entire life could do nothing for her. France's best specialists tried every possible treatment, but Claude's condition kept deteriorating week after week. Caillet, a man used to solving everything with a scalpel and chemistry, found himself powerless for the first time, facing a body that responded to no therapy. He, who had spent his life giving technical answers to his patients, now had none to give his wife. Desperate, he decided to try a path that had nothing to do with faith. For years, he had studied radiesthesia and geobiology, and according to those theories, certain places on Earth were crossed by powerful energy currents. Lourdes, because of its geography, was supposedly one of those points. It wasn't faith that drew him to that shrine, but the idea, entirely scientific in his own mind, that the environment itself might produce a beneficial, almost physical shock to his wife's health. When he proposed it to Claude, she was stunned. She knew exactly who her husband was, a high-ranking Freemason, openly anti-clerical. And yet she agreed, willing to try anything. They left for Lourdes on a morning in February 1983, one of the coldest of the year. And it was there that Caillet's logic ran into something he hadn't planned for. It was an empty winter morning, far from the summer crowds. The cold was sharp, almost motionless. Caillet walked Claude to the shrine's pools, where the sick immersed themselves in the spring water. He arranged to meet her in front of the grotto and was left alone, hands in his pockets, not knowing what to do. He didn't want to stand outside freezing. He walked more or less at random among the basilica's buildings until he came across the entrance to a crypt. He went in only to warm up. Inside, a weekday mass was just beginning, barely a dozen faithful and a priest at the altar. Caillet, who in 50 years had never attended a religious service except out of social obligation, sat down in the back, almost by accident, and watched everything with the cold detachment of a scientist. And then, during that liturgy, something in him broke. No audible voice, no vision. Caillet would later describe it in his own writings as a gentle explosion of light. Not a light that blinds the eyes, but a light that illuminates in an instant his entire mind. Inside his head, he heard a question. "It's a good thing that you ask for Claude's healing. But you, what do you have to offer?" 15 years of rationalism, of Masonic rites, of theories about the Earth's energy currents, collapsed in the space of a weekday mass, in front of 10 strangers who weren't even looking at him. No one in that crypt knew who the man sitting in the back was. No one knew he was one of the most influential Freemasons in France. To them, he was just one more worshipper, arriving late, maybe just for the warmth. A man who had walked into that crypt only to get warm walked out of it, without yet knowing it, a completely different man. When the mass ended, Caillet was no longer the same man. 3 months later, he formally requested baptism. Around the same time, the other event happened that he himself would forever link to that conversion. Claude made a full recovery from the illness no doctor had been able to cure. Caillet's path of faith, however, was neither immediate nor straightforward. He first passed through the Gallican Orthodox Church, still searching for his way, as if a lifetime of spiritual seeking couldn't simply stop all at once before finally finding the Catholic Church. It was his enthusiasm for the papacy of John Paul II that convinced him to take the final step. He and Claude together received the outpouring of the Holy Spirit in the charismatic renewal at the Beatitudes community. And it was at that moment that Caillet made a second break, perhaps even more radical than the first. He abandoned every esoteric and occult practice he had cultivated for years. Radiesthesia, his Rosicrucian affiliation, everything he had once called white magic, realizing that none of it was compatible with the faith he had just found. For him, it wasn't a compromise. It was a clean break, the same radical decisiveness with which he had lived Freemasonry for 15 years. But the rational life he had built over 15 years in the lodge would not let go of him so easily. A Venerable Master of the Grand Orient of France cannot simply walk away, least of all to embrace the Catholic Church, which the lodge regarded as a declared enemy. Caillet submitted his irrevocable resignation, and the reaction was immediate. He received threats, both direct and veiled. His professional career was boycotted, he lost public positions, and he was expelled from the Socialist Party, of which he had been an active member. He himself would later recount living through those months in real fear of retaliation. The same invisible network that had opened every door for him for 15 years now moved to close them all, one after another. But he never turned back. He wrote several books about his experience, including Du secret des loges à la lumière du Christ and I Was a Freemason, offering a rare testimony from the inside on the workings of a world he had known for 15 years from its very top. Books that would be translated into multiple languages, read by thousands of people who had asked themselves the same question. What remains today of that freezing morning in a crypt in Lourdes? The story of Maurice Caillet reminds us of something simple. No mind, however armored by rationalism or power, is beyond the reach of grace. Sometimes all it takes is a freezing morning, a shelter found by chance, and the humility to sit in the back of a crypt. Caillet had spent an entire life building systems to explain the world without God, science, the occult, the power of the lodges. And yet none of those systems had ever made him as free as those few minutes of silence in a mass he had walked into only to get warm. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. And if you'd like to join us in prayer, write it below. Lord, open our hearts to your gentle light and guide us on the path of truth. May that light shine in your life too today.